hadith by Prophet Muhammad criticizing this action and this group of terrorists. So please, who's the founder of this group, and what David means by they are not alone?
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, Professor Henry Bussola, I hope that I'm pronouncing your name right, correct? And also Mr. Haydar Elu. I would like, first of all, to thank you very much for giving me this chance in order to participate with you here today and share with you some of the views about ISIS, their origins, their beliefs, their targets, and as well I would like to share an attempt with you on how to deal with them as well in the future. Let me start by rephrasing what Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi said on the 29th of June. He said that he's calling or he's operating in order for Muslims to achieve honor and dignity. Well, it struck us, it might struck us, who doesn't want to achieve honor and dignity, or who doesn't want to live in honor and dignity. And it was a good thing that you brought up the citation of the Prophet Muhammad, where he says that their speech doesn't really apply to their actions. So we address some critique to IS. I would like to prefer to call it IS, as they call themselves, the Islamic State. We address some critique to them as they are being inhumane, as using these scripts and texts in order to execute some actions that we consider inhumane. I mean, in our civil sense, as they don't coincide with the human rights. But I would dare to say that maybe unfortunately we can see some Islamic states, there are maybe plenty of them who sometimes use the same punishments, and they kind of interpret the same texts from the Quran, and yeah, we sometimes object to that, but it still be used. I'm not trying to say that these states are terrorist states, but still, the script is being interpreted by different scholars of Islam, and they are being used in a vicious and rigorous way, and yeah, in order to hurt people. But still, we condemn ISIS or IS, and we struggle, or we try to struggle in order to stop their expansion. And let's say,
who's their finder?
Yes, exactly. Who's their finder? Well, maybe if we should go back early in history, my dear fellow, he spoke about the Khawarij. And today, even by plenty of Sunni Muslims, they are still called al-Khawarij. So there is an old interpretation, but my colleague here said, or spoke about the spread or the beginning from Afghanistan, or specifically in Khorasan, because as they believe that there is a phrase by Prophet Muhammad who says, or in that phrase, it's supposed that the Prophet Muhammad said that the black veins or the black flags will appear from Khorasan and they will start taking over. And they use that phrase actually in their own propaganda. You can Google that, or you can look it up in YouTube. There is a video still. Unfortunately, my colleague today, Yoel Albury, whom I assisted, and we have covered many videos on YouTube, trying to listen to their speeches and trying to see their goals and what they really like to achieve. And they are kind of sincere and open with what they would like to achieve. So it's not a hidden agenda. So we know that. And the most important thing is for us to adopt or to create or find a strategy in order to spread or in order to stop the spreading of that cancer. And many ideas were brought up here before, including military actions, and we heard the previous attempt to stop Al-Qaeda by the awakening program, or Majalis al-Sahwa, awakening councils, and we found that even though it was successful for a while, that project, when it was stopped, it led to the actual reawakening of Al-Qaeda, which then transferred into IS.
It's good to stop here, so please,
yes.
I would like to move the speech to Juha. Juha, could you please tell us, you said that in your speech, we can't be separated, they can't be separated from Islam, as you heard from Abbas Bahmoud, from Their Excellency's ambassador. They all say that they are not Islam, and even in its speech, the ambassador of Iran, he says that many muftis in Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and other Islamic countries declared IS out of Islam. So, how you justify your comments?
Okay, thank you very much. That is an excellent question. And, I'd like to begin with the kind of notion that we really need to separate empirical facts from normative facts. I'm not entirely sure there's anyone here who would argue that normatively the Islamic State represents Islam in any way. But empirically, as I mentioned in the presentation, they are using concepts that come from Islamic tradition and are used in various strands of Islam. And I think that is an empirical fact that cannot be overlooked, even though there are probably the vast majority of Muslims think that they are absolutely reprehensive. But in terms of how they kind of conceptualize themselves and their own ideology, jihadis are still a part of the jihadi tradition, even though they are a small fringe with absolute no normative support from outside the jihadi circles. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And what would you comment about the origin of ISIS?
Before I answer you, I would like very much that I want to see an action.
We have time for the audience.
It's very important.
Yeah.
Well, as we mentioned, the speaker, the origin of ISIS in three parallel ways. First of all, as I mentioned, is the policy, the international policy. The second thing is ISIS comes from Al-Qaeda, who was built in Afghanistan by CIA. And the third thing, that the regional government, like I would say, like Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, supported ISIS, let's say, in the beginning and up to now. So, also, there is another factor, the slogan and the propaganda of ISIS being attracted to the youth, and then the youth also enter to the ISIS and then become a power in the region.
And
can I just have a quick comment?
Yeah.
Regarding the comment you made about CIA being in a central role in the creation of Al-Qaeda, I personally believe, of course, there are plenty of proof that the CIA had a very central role in supporting the wider Afghan resistance, and even some Arab fighters. But at least in my own research, I've come across no piece of information which suggests that American funds were directly given to Al-Qaeda by American operatives. Whether the American funds went through the Pakistani intelligence towards Al-Qaeda, that's a good question. I don't have an answer to that. But I certainly disagree with the fact that CIA had a central role in the creation of Al-Qaeda.
The other point I would like to raise is that Islamic State, where does this terrorist group get its support from? ISIS proclaimed Islamic order on territories they captured both in Iraq and Syria. The area they are now hold contains economically vital oil sites. So some figures, 130 million barrels of oil has been sold, smuggled. And the trade exchange between ISIS and Turkey is about 900 million. So what do you think, Mr.
Well, certainly ISIS gets most of its funding trading oil, maybe trading water, organized crime, certain kinds of taxes. And in terms of oil trading, it has been particularly worrisome to see that so many oil wells have fallen under the IS control. But I'd say these kind of wealth that IS is accumulating, it needs to be put in a wider context. And as I mentioned, Islamic State is a hybrid organization, which means it also needs to govern. It cannot funnel all of its money to political violence anymore. Of course, it's still a formidable threat in terms of being a guerrilla army and being a terrorist organization, but it needs to funnel a lot of resources into governing, and that's going to be a real issue in the future, because even though they are as rich as they are today, and I'm quite skeptical about numbers in press. They tend to be either biased, they are either lowball or highball the estimate, and there's not that much reliable data. But you know, there are different estimates going from a couple of millions a day to a couple of millions per week to a couple of 100 millions per month. But the issue is, how effective can they use those resources? And this is a question that hasn't been answered yet. There are some early indications that they are trying to fund good governance in Raqqa and Mosul, but those are symbolic kind of flagships to the caliphate, if you will. And in terms of governance elsewhere in the region, it's an open question still. And they may be wealthy, but there are two issues. One is effectiveness in using those resources, and the other one is the insurgency resource curse. Will their riches attract opportunists and criminals who may, I'd say, hasten their downfall?
Thank you very much. If I may add to your analysis, actually, I've earlier tried to find out the participants or the members of ISIS. I tried to categorize them. What do they represent? What do they consist of? Well, and try please to help me if you disagree with me, or if you would like to add another category. And I reached up to 4 categories. The first of them, of course, are the believers, or the one who does that as an act of creed. And even though that there aren't any known recognized numbers of how many they are, but they still represent a clear minority. And then, as you have addressed before, there are the former regime members, the Ba'ath parties who also participate, and I believe that they also represent a moderate number as well. Adding to that, there are the people that you have already referred to as alienated or marginalized, and actually many of them are doing that because of economic reasons. Partly, and also partly because they think that they are somehow will be able to reach a level of unknown dignity. And the fourth category that maybe no one has mentioned before are the people who are being forced to join IS. I mean, we hear a lot of news from Syria, we hear a lot of news from Iraq, that when they enter villages, they actually force people to let their children join or participate in IS. And if it's possible to move into the next step, I mean the solutions, then maybe we could find a ground where we could actually absorb the last and third category in order to be able to start a process to maybe if not eliminate, at least to weaken IS.
Yeah, I completely agree with the point. Of course, these four categories may change in accordance to the context. I think this particularly is applicable to the conflict region itself, Syria, and parts of Syria and parts of Iraq. And definitely the fourth category, the forced ones, is something that we really as social scientists need to put more focus on, but collecting data is exceedingly difficult. But definitely, unfortunately, in terms of who gets the most attention, it's the first two categories, which kind of may lead us to exaggerate the problem. But in terms of violent state actors, it's quite common that the hardcore believers is a very, very small minority within any given organization, and those are the ones who make things tick. As long as they're pragmatic, the movement might do quite as well, but if they're very ideologically heavy, as they tend to be with Al-Qaeda in Iraq and later the Islamic State, that brings about a plethora of problems for their project sustainability. And I think in that term, they might even shoot themselves in the foot before the international community can do anything about it. But this is hopeful thinking.
If I might share with you some numbers, actually,
Yeah.
And I'm referring to Chuck Hagel, the U.S. Defense Minister, and he was speaking about 100 Americans and approximately about 2,000 Europeans, actually, and there are estimations that there are about 12,000 foreign fighters, both in Iraq and Syria. And there's actually a point that I would like to highlight here. And it's kind of a personal thing that I would like to share with you. Yesterday, I spent almost a whole day actually participating in the Swedish elections. I was both monitoring and also receiving votes and calculating. And it's not something new that we discovered. It's unfortunately something that's grown a lot, both in Europe and also in other regions in the world, and that's extremism. So we find some extremist parties, populist parties rising up in Europe, and the same thing could be also linked to these extremist organizations that are growing up in that region. So I would dare to say that it's kind of a global phenomenon that we are witnessing for the moment, unfortunately. I believe that. Thank you.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I really agree. The case of foreign fighters that have joined the Islamic State, that's an interesting one, and that's something I followed for at least 2 years. Of course, when we look at the categories, they are a little bit different in terms of foreign fighters. They tend to be either believers, in a sense that they radicalized either in small groups or behind the keyboard, kind of got the ideology and very romanticized the idea of what fighting jihad is, but then when they travel to a conflict zone, a chunk of them, and again unfortunately there's no numbers, but when the kind of reality of being in a conflict zone hits you in the face, you, at least in the cases of the Islamic State, you tend to either become a forced foreign fighter, so you fight for the Islamic State because there's no way out, and this applies to countries with legislation banning foreign fighters from returning, and those cases where fighters have tried to leave their comrades and their group behind, and they get captured. They either get executed or they are forced to fight, and this is a phenomenon that we have individual anecdotes about, but unfortunately, again, getting information from the conflict zones is difficult. So we don't necessarily know how large this phenomenon is.
Yes, one point I would like also to mention, that when ISIS controlled part of the Syria in the north, actually nobody attacked them in the beginning. Nobody attacked ISIS in the beginning. On the other hand, or in the opposite, there are some countries who give them weapon, logistic, money, and supporting them in Syria, so they grow. So this is one of the points that it's really amazing. That then at the end they say, oh my God, that something is growing against us. So this is what we call it chess game, that they are some powers using ISIS against something. Let's say, put it clearly, use ISIS against President Assad. But at the end, now ISIS become a big danger. Thank you.
Yes, I totally agree with what Mr. Al-Jumaini just said. But at the same time, we've got to be honest with ourselves. We've got to be, I wouldn't like to say harsh on ourselves, but rather to criticize in order to improve, in order not to make the mistakes that we have made already. I mean, it was agonizing, and I would say also a shameful and bitter truth, which is the defeat of the Iraqi army in Mosul. It was a huge disaster. It wasn't supposed to happen. How did that happen? We need to look at that. And in order not to I mean, we should look at it as external and internal facts, exogenous and indigenous. Well, of course, there are the exogenous facts. We have the problem in Syria, and we could have prevented that from happening in Iraq. We did have the instruments, but unfortunately, the previous government of Iraq, and I'm hoping really that the new government, and will be hopefully soon coming to the solutions of the problem. And I would not like to keep on talking on that subject.
We want to talk about
yes,
first.
Yes, figures. Yes, there is actually an approximation about. Yes.
Yeah, if you let me just one comment to ask.
Yes.
We three talk in English accent, or you talk in American accent, so I start with you. And ISIS has about 20,000 to 30,000 terrorists. And if you compare to countries in ground troop in Europe, it exceeds the number of those soldiers in these countries. Like Hungary has only 10,000 soldiers. Austria has only 14, half of ISIS, and Norway has 9,000 ground troops. So how would you say that you are not considered of the action of ISIS in Europe?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
The question is, you said in your speech that you are not concerned of those sleeping cells in Europe.
Yes. Well, what I mentioned is we shouldn't be concerned of small cells in countries where the jihadi or the radical Islamist scene is just forming or has been formed. Finland is one of those cases. We don't have any reliable data of how many radicalized individuals there are. But in terms of radicalized individuals with connections to terrorist groups or individuals operating abroad, that's around 200. So I'm not that concerned yet, especially as we've seen that, well, radicalization to the point of undertaking political violence as a form of activism, that has only risen in the past 7 years. So we are still early on in the phases, which doesn't mean it's not going to be a problem later on. But currently for countries like Finland, Switzerland, maybe Austria, domestic terrorism isn't that big an issue, and if we exaggerate it, that might become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Of course, this is a completely different situation than what's going on in Germany, what's going on in France, what's going on in the UK. Their Islamist and jihadist scenes are more developed, and there is plenty of reason to suggest that there are agents or sleeper cells operating domestically, although those would be considered as foreign fighters. The rest might be volunteers for humanitarian causes or mercenaries. Or
if you compare, I'm Muslim. If you compare the amount of these to the Muslim living in Finland, it's the hugest amount among the percentage proportion. It's the hugest.
Part of this figure.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to add, first of all, I would like to add another figure, and we often love statistics actually. So we were speaking about the sleeping cells in Europe and how much damage they could actually make here. And I have a number here in front of me, and there are actually 415 casualties, deaths in Europe, due to terrorist attacks since 2004, I believe, in the Medved bombings, the train bombings in Medved. So it's quite an insignificant number. I mean, the organized crime is committing more
traffic
exactly, and even traffic accidents. But of course, there is this growing fear. I mean, it's one of the reasons why also I just mentioned the spread or the growth of extremism. It could be also attributed to that as a fact. But still, I mean, most of the Muslim people here in Europe are productive. But I would also once again go back to the numbers that I just shared a moment ago, where I said that 100 fighters were from the United States, and approximately about 2,000 were from Europe. And there are a couple of reasons for that. And I would hope if you could add maybe a third reason. I mean, the first one is that the integration in the United States, well, first of all, is the assimilation in the United States is a lot easier, and it's possible to assimilate in the American society. Otherwise, if you do not assimilate, you could integrate into society. And while in Europe, assimilation is not an option. Almost, I hardly find some people who could actually assimilate in their societies. I mean, Muslims and foreigners. Well, and integration is still also very weak. And this makes this alienation. Those young people who kind of grow up rootless in Europe, and they will try somehow to find this dignity and honor which this al-Baghdadi provides. So I believe that we should take a look at the integration process also in Europe and how it could actually absorb all the possible suspects or possible tendencies.
Just one small point. Just one sentence. You know, the threat to the society sometimes, not considering the numbers, maybe 4 people can destabilize the whole Finland if they are working in the secret way from the south. Just 4 people. I mean, even in England, there are just 5 years ago, few people who actually make the hero in the London. So when we talk about 45 people from here, or 100 from the United States going to Syria, just imagine how many people backing them here, how many people supporting them. So the number sometimes is not really very, very important, but a few people can make very major danger.
Yeah, I agree completely. When we look at terrorism as a kind of method of political violence, you can do a lot of damage with quite a limited number of people. But I think in Finland the main issue still is prevention. And if we create a discourse in society which polarizes Muslims against non-Muslims, we are going to create a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think definitely radicalization and foreign fighting is something that Finnish authorities should really focus on and maybe kind of try to pass new kind of legislation to maybe prevent it. But if we exaggerate the problem or exaggerate the issue, there are going to be more people who feel that they cannot integrate, they cannot assimilate, or even they feel alienated because they feel they are targeted. And that way I think we're making the problem worse instead of making it better. And Finland thankfully is still in the position where we can make the problem better instead of trying to keep it at a manageable level.
Let me have some comments from the audience. I would like to ask Vialiwa to give his opinion about this.
Gentlemen, thank you for your informative information. The fact is, Islamic is all the time the same Islam. there's no traditional Islam, organizational Islam or governmental Islam. It is the same. The fact we have seen ESS in different name, in different concepts through the history of Islam. Well, I'm trying to focus on what's the Britain and France as biggest player in the region, where they focused on establishing states based on three elements: the fact tribalism and nationalism and religion. Now we have a focus. We have the fact that the big conflict is the religion, which because of it is the major and the common things on the region. Hopefully we can resolve this problem, but then we come up to nationalism conflict, and after that the tribalism conflict. These nations and states have to live with conflicts. This is the fact. Because of there is lack of democracy, there is lack of state of law. As soon we get the state of law, then I think we succeed at that time against in our fight against the kind of conflicts which are based on religion and nationalism and the tribalism. So how do you see the future on the basis of three elements and with the same conflicts through the history? Thank you.
Majid Bahanpour, please.
I would like to put this to the panel that ISIS is operating in a landlocked area. Many foreign fighters is said to have gone, 12,000 fighters have gone to this area. It's very strange. Turkey is member of NATO. How to a country member of NATO, so many foreign fighters have been able to go there? Jordan is under American influence, Western influence. The countries surrounding the area, Iraqi government is completely under American influence. How could 12,000 fighters go to a landlocked area without the support of CIA or the people who supported this group, ISIS, from beginning? Second, the fairy tales that ISIS is selling oil, $2 million or $2 billion, I have heard even from Russian TV. The logistics of selling $2 billion oil is so huge. If in a landlocked area they can sell $2 billion oil in a couple of months, how is that possible? Thank you.
So we have Robert has a question or comment. Question?
Yeah. My name is Robert Eklund. I'm a political science student at the university here. I was thinking that it seems to be really hard to make a long-term policy now, even for the US. 1 year ago, they were ready to airstrike Syrian government. Now they may have to cooperate with the Syrian government. So I would like to ask about the Syrian dilemma. That has ISIS made it impossible for the moderate Syrian opposition to succeed by creating a common enemy for the neighboring governments who prior to ISIS' rise had different strategies on their relations to Syria? Thank you.
Next we have Mr. Marko Juntunen.
Yes, I'm Marko Juntunen from University of Tampere. Since 2009 I've made 3 field trips to Iraq, and I've talked to practically several dozens of ordinary Iraqis in cafes and homes. And I have not met one Iraqi who says that the state-building project has not been a failure. They all say that this country has been fractured into sort of either ethnicized or sectarianized identities. And I think that this is an issue that needs to be tackled together with the strategies when we're trying to confront ISIS. Because how do we build a kind of sort of political front that is inclusive for all Iraqis? if sectarian discourses prevail and they sort of dominate the politics, so there will always be a basis for sort of larger disagreements and also for political projects that are kind of exclusive. Okay, so that's something that I wanted to ask. Another is the global aspect of this whole conflict. Today, several dozens of imams in Finland are gathered together to talk about the sectarianism, increasing sectarianism in Europe. How do you see that this kind of sort of the presence of sectarian language use among the Muslim communities, what does it mean for the future of Muslim communities in the Western diaspora? Because I think it is also very important. ISIS is utilizing very effectively sectarian language also with the diasporic community. Thank you.
Okay. I'm Dr. Ammar Al-Kani and I'm from the committee of the support of free Syrian people in Finland. And well, in Syria, we do not consider ISIS as a religious armed movement. It's in fact, ISIS is the hidden armed arm of the Syrian regime. Now 4 million Syrians now are refugees outside Syria and 10 million inside the country are without homes. And now we are talking about ISIS that are fighting. ISIS has rise in Iraq and they were, before coming to Syria, were formed by the former secret service of Saddam Hussein armies. And all of us, we know that most of the leaders of ISIS, even that they are in Syria, they are about 40 former officers from the Saddam armies. And the hitting power of the ISIS is composed of 1,000 Russian soldiers, and they are the iron fist that ISIS is hitting them. And their commander, their army commander is Abu Omar. It's a Chechen Russian officer who was fighting in the conflict of Georgia in 2003.
Al-Shishani?
Yes. And we have here all the documentations that showing that Abu Omar al-Shishani and his officers, Russian officers, are forming the hitting armed fist. So he is with his generals in Syria. They have captured from the Syrian Revolution Army about a division from T-72 tanks before going to Mosul. It was about 1 month from going to Mosul, and they were named the David Division, Armed Division. They went from Idlib on the frontier of Turkey across about 900 kilometers to Mosul, across the Syrian land. Nobody has intervened and to stop them. How is possible a whole armed division of tanks to go there? And also how it's possible that this ISIS, with their so-called young jihadists, can stop the Iraqi army in Mosul. They have attacked Mosul with 2,000 soldiers. In Mosul they had 30,000 Iraqi soldiers armed, and they have captured war airplanes from the Mosul airport, military airport. They have captured $500 million from the central bank in Mosul. They were not protected. So can we talk about some kind of under-table international agreement or not?
Okay.
I mean.
Thank you. You have your time?
Yes.
Please, Mr.
Assalamu alaikum. I am Falah al-Musawi, a politic from Sweden. I have one question. As we know that all the countries surround Iraq must have an action deal with the solution of ICE problems. My question is, why USA and some of country do not agree, Iran and Syria do not share with this operation? This is my question, if you are not. Thanks.
Thank you. I would like to ask how we have a representative from the Finnish police. I would like to ask you about the treating of those terrorists who were in the village. Could you please give us a Finnish or English as well?
Ja, me olemme Helsingin poliisilaitoksen ennaltaestävästä ryhmästä ja meidän ryhmän tehtävä on yrittää ennaltaestää.
Finish.
Could we have a translation?
Yeah, I can translate.
Okay. Saan puhua suomeksi, niin käytän sen hyväksi. Eli ennaltaestoimintaryhmästä ja tarkoitus yrittää ennaltaestää radikalisoitumista ja muuta tällaista väkivaltaista toimintaa Helsingissä. Ja kysyttiin minulta, että kuinka mä näen tämän terrorismin Helsingissä tai Suomessa, niin tietysti mä en ole nyt suojelupoliisista, niin en pysty kommentoimaan heidän puolestaan, mutta ehkä oma näkökulma on se, että Suomessa riski on vielä aika pieni. Että Suomessa tehtäisiin olla jonkinnäköinen terroristinen hyökkäys tai isku, mutta ainahan se on mahdollista. Ja mikä tärkeintä tässä on, että miten me saadaan ennaltaestettyä, se on se, että saadaan nämä eri uskonnolliset ryhmät keskustelemaan toistensa kanssa sekä myös sitten valtion ja kaupungin ja muiden yhteisöjen kanssa yhdessä, niin kuin tänä iltana on tällainen tapahtuma olemassa kaupungin talolla. Eli tärkeää on saada sellainen hyvä yhteistyö näihin yhteisöihin. Ja näiden yhteisöjen tehtävä on sitten ennalta estää näitä terroristi-iskuja tai muuta vastaan. Eli yhteisön pitää huolta niistä omista jäsenistään ja ystävistä ja tuttavista, että he eivät sitten lähde tälle radikalisoitumisen tielle. Se, mitä poliisi voi sitten tehdä, niin on yrittää ohjata näitä henkilöitä sitten sellaisen tahon puoleen, joka pystyy ehkä heitä auttamaan jollakin tavalla. Ehkä se voi olla joku tunnettu imaami tai sosiaaliviranomainen tai joku vastaava. Mutta tämä on vielä vähän kehitteillä Suomessa. Meillä ei ole vielä tapahtunut juuri mitään vastaavaa, niin nyt vasta harjoitellaan ja toivotaan, että mitään ei tapahdu. Kiitos. Saatteko vastauksen?
May I just ask you a question, please? In Sweden, we do have a law, we call it the FRA, I believe that you might have heard of that, which allows the intelligence services and police to monitor the telecommunication of certain suspects. Do you have a similar system here in Finland?
Seuranta. Siis puhelimien ja näitä sähköpostia.
Sana continua.
Onko sellaista Suomessa?
No tietysti suojelupoliisi saattaa tehdä jonkinnäköistä tällaista, mutta paikallispoliisilla ei tällä hetkellä ainakaan suoranaisesti ole mitään vastaavaa. Se mitä paikallispoliisi tekee tai mitä minäkin teen, niin on ehkä lähinnä tämmöistä keskustelupalstojen seuraamista ja sitä kautta sitten tulee tietoon ehkä jotain. Mutta mitään tämmöisiä niin sähköpostien salaista lukemista tai puhelujen kuuntelua tai seurantaa, niin meillä ei kyllä ole. Mutta jos epäillään, että joku tämmöinen vakava rikos olisi tapahtumassa, olisi oikeasti epäily, että joku aikoo tehdä jonkinnäköisen terroristi-iskun, niin totta kai silloin tämmöisiä mahdollisuuksia käytetään hyväksi. Mutta ei täällä Suomessa niinku kuunnella ihmisten sähköposteja ja tekstiviestejä lueta niinku salaa. Se ei kuulu meidän toimintatapaan. Pitää olla joku peruste siihen. Kiitos.
Okay. Yeah, you have a question?
Well, the fact is, according to the Voice of Iraq, the news agency, which published on 15th of January, which mentioned there was a big group of terrorists have been, they have a very sensitive meeting held in Helsinki, where more than about 7 organizations who work in civil societies were participated on that meeting. And also, unfortunately, the ambassador left the seminar. The fact is also mentioned on the article that about 4 diplomatic staff of the embassy were participated on that meeting as a member of Ba'ath Party. And similar meetings being held in Denmark and before that in Norway. I don't know how it's the 45 fighters. It doesn't seem really a big threat to Finland, because when one guy can kill lots of people, how the 45, which they believe and their mission killing people. And I'm feeling sorry about the Organization of Security in Finland. If they don't know about that kind of meeting, I can give you a lot of details and also the names. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The last question was Dr. Ala, and then we will have answers from the gentleman.
Yes, I'm Ala Hassan from the Arab Technology Forum. My question is very brief. I mean, how many people should we accept to be killed in Finland so that we consider that there is really a threat or a risk? I mean, are we talking about 10, okay, we don't consider the risk, 50, 100? I mean, shall we compare this with the loss we get in the traffic, or using bicycles, or what? I mean, we have to, I mean, are we quantifying the risk in terms of people? For me, I think 1 is too much. A threat which will make a damage for 1 Finn is too much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please, Mr. Martin.
I would like to mention that the conflict in the Middle East is very, very complicated, or very complicated. So when I answer in general about the whole question, look, I give you one example. There was a meeting in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia between about 11 countries. One of them, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, and United States, and Jordan, and so on. The aim of the conference or the meeting is how to fight ISIS. Whereas everybody knows that Saudi Arabia and Turkey supporting ISIS. So see the conflict. Now, oil. Do you know how many people helping ISIS to smuggle oil out of the Iraq and Syria to support them? Do you know that ISIS is very well organized and they're using a very high technology in order controlling, the area which they occupy? So what I'm trying to say is very, very complicated. The conflict between Sunni and Shi'i is a historical conflict, but we're trying to, make it in some way or another not to be a war conflict, but it's not easy. I would say I'm talking about myself. I'm hoping that not just us as a Muslim, I'm hoping at the whole international community try to intervene in order to see the conflict in what's in reality. Because somebody asked, look, America is fighting Assad just 3 months ago, and now they want to make a dialogue with him. What's happening? So America trying, in the beginning, they supported ISIS in some way or another, indirectly, but now they want to destroy it. Please, we need a strategy. We need a vision to live in peace and harmony. We cannot live like this. We are talking here, okay, some people say, oh, the danger in Finland is not really real. But I'm telling you, if we don't move now, something will happen. We cannot avoid it. Thank you.
I will start from where he ended. How actual are these speculations that there are small threatening of these groups in Finland?
Well, as I mentioned earlier on, I mainly use open source data on my research, and I've found no indication of any domestic activist. Oh, it should be on.
It needs to be close to your mouth.
You can take this one instead.
Cheers. That's on, please. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier on, I rely on open source data, and I personally not come across any piece of information that suggests that there are individuals in Finland who are sufficiently radicalized to try to perform political violence here. And what should be noted in the context of radical Islam or jihadist activity, it's normatively, meaning it's more acceptable to go fight in a conflict zone abroad than practice terrorism outside conflict zone. There aren't that many studies done regarding the matter, but all those studies that have been done, and Thomas Heghammer has a fantastic piece on kind of target preference of radical Islamist or jihadist, and he suggests that it's 4 times as common to go fight abroad than it is to try to undertake a domestic plot. And within foreign fighters, only 1 in 9 foreign fighter returns with the desire to undertake a terrorist attack. So what we are seeing in Finland is now foreign fighting is becoming more common, or at least it's more in the public eye. But there are still some ways to go for a credible terrorist attack, and that is the, I think, official estimation of the FCIS, which is local SAPM.
And what about the questions?
The questions.
Many people ask you.
I think I want to focus on this 12,000 foreign fighters to Syria without the help of CIA. I think that is a very interesting question, but it has a problem that is very inherent. Things happen in the Middle East without America being behind it. I've seen no evidence suggesting that CIA plays any role in the foreign fighter phenomenon. If you want to really dig your teeth into what has been going on in Turkey, and Turkey has been the highway of foreign fighters to Syria, you can look at changes in Turkish foreign policy after the Arab Spring. They had this zero enemies policy for a long time, and then when things in Syria started to look bad, Turkey changed their foreign policy, saying Assad must go now, and they allowed foreign fighters to travel through Turkey and developed an infrastructure that was designed to facilitate foreign fighters into Syria. And that was how the phenomenon itself, or the highway of foreign fighters, was born. And of course, after that, Turkey, which hasn't been paying much attention, they lose control if they ever had it. The phenomenon became bigger. It started to have unforeseen consequences, more structural violence near the Syrian border, a couple of acts of political violence in Istanbul and elsewhere. And now they've only started to kind of stamp down on the foreign fighter phenomenon. But again, the damage is already done to an extent. There are a lot of foreign fighters that go through Turkey, and Turkey has a fantastic infrastructure in terms of traveling to Syria. You fly from Helsinki, it takes 3 hours, it costs about 200-300 euros. You can go there, be there in 3 hours, then you catch a connecting flight or take a bus to the border, and then you go over, because you're helped by various armed groups that operate rather openly in Turkey, or at least operated until very, very recently. And that's my answer to that question.
Thank you very much. Well, if we take a look back to what happened in Mosul, what could actually interpret or see that as an intelligence failure? Well, indeed it was. I mean,
3,000 fighters in the city. It shouldn't have been a very difficult thing. It shouldn't have been a difficult thing in order to stop them. So intelligence services and police monitoring is actually a vital instrument, not only in Europe, I mean not only in the United States, but even in other parts of the world. But the major issue here, both, I wouldn't say both actually, what Europe managed to achieve is actually a high grade of tolerance, and this is the thing that we highly lack in the Middle East. So it's something that Mr. Mann just spoke about. I mean, the conflict between Shia and Sunni, it could be easily traced to the lack of tolerance. I mean, intolerance is a major problem. Tolerance doesn't mean, I mean, certainly all of you know what the meaning of tolerance. It doesn't mean that you would accept the other for, I mean, it doesn't mean that you would agree with the other as he is, but you would accept him as he is. So, this is one of the things that hopefully we'll be speaking more a little bit further about the questions. There was a question risen whether there is a moderate Syrian opposition. Unfortunately, I did not see that. There are no evidence of such a movement, and that's quite unfortunate. And the problem is that they are either being squeezed by ISIS and the Syrian regime, and well, it's what from the evidence that I have seen, well, maybe for a certain time there might have been a cooperation between the Syrian regime and ISIS, but I don't think that this thing is continuing until the moment. They are fighting each other, and it is a matter of survival for them both, actually. And about the Chechenians, I mean, well, of course, the Chechenians were actually fighting Russians, and they kind of destroyed or demolished the whole city in order to try to eliminate those Chechenian fighters. So the Russians were also quite cruel in order to stop them. So it wouldn't be very surprising that some of them would actually join ISIS. They have used earlier these methods in Russia, and it's very probable.
With Russian army street fighting in Georgia, in the war in Georgia in 2003.
Well, there was another important question about the three categories that you named earlier. I would like to add a fourth one, and I would like also to add some complements to these. So in order for them to function, I mean, well, of course, you would need to have a state, a strong state, and that means that the state must be adjoined or accompanied by justice, or impartial. And, well, the rule of law, of course, we need the rule of law, but it must also apply to all of the citizens, all of the members, not having an elite which is excluded from the rule of law. And that's one of the biggest problems that we are facing, actually, in Iraq. But on the other hand, we would say we cannot have a real conciliation if we wouldn't try like to forgive and forget at the same time. So it is kind of a paradox, and it is kind of a trade-off that we would need to develop in the future in order to exceed this threshold. As for democracy, it's the same problem that lies there. It must be an inclusive democracy. So you cannot just have a kind of a democratic system that doesn't really function as a democratic regime or as a democratic governance. The fourth component that I would like to add, and that's the most important one of them actually, which I believe supports all of these three other categories, and that's the civil society. If you really cannot have a civil society, a genuine civil society, you will never be able to, first of all, have tolerance and also end these internal conflicts. So by ending the marginalization and alienation, you will exclude people from joining movements such as IS or the Islamic Army or Naqshbandiya army or whatever movement. And even I would say that I've been actually speaking about a lot of Sunni militant groups where there are Shia militant groups as well.
Too much.
Yeah, actually, way too many. That's true indeed. We must also eliminate exile. We must also see that the current militarization process that has went on in order to try to expel IS ends in a proper manner. There is a proposition now laid in order to establish a kind of a public guard or national guard. It is called a national guard, and it's very important to be an inclusive national guard. So if we manage to establish that national guard,
you mean it's inclusive? What do
you mean? Inclusive. You must include everyone in the Iraqi state. So all citizens, exactly. So all the Iraqi citizens must participate, or people from different ethnic, religious, or sectarian groups must be equally participated or represented there. Well, further on, there is the economic issue. You cannot really solve this problem without having economic instruments. I mean, many people actually join IS because of economic deprivation. So people lack industries, production. We will not end this problem as well. The third and most important issue that needs to be managed as well, which unfortunately we have neglected to speak about, that's the media. What we have in Iraq today, not only in Iraq, I mean generally in the Islamic world, we have a very polarized media. We have either Sunni polarized media, we have either Shia polarized media, or we have also Kurdish nationalist media. And when you look at the Iraqi TV channel, I mean the governmental TV channel, they always actually kind of hail the government, and they always like endorse the government and its actions. So there has been absolutely no critics for the deeds that the government had done wrongly towards its people. And then, connected with the civil society, once again, we must have a dialogue. I mean, a religious dialogue. There is a huge necessity to revise texts. I mean, spiritual texts, religious texts, and scriptures. We need to reinterpret them. We need to, I wouldn't say we cannot rewrite them, unfortunately, but we need to revise them. So in order to understand them better. Otherwise, there will always be a group that will use these texts in order to justify their deeds. I'm sorry.
Sure that they are not going to be treated once more radically. Because ISIS has read the Islamic traditions, and they turned the neck of the contest and became radical.
Well, the Crusades in the medieval centuries went on because of spiritual texts, or because of an interpretation that the Pope at that time gave, and it was justifying all the injustice wars that went on, and even the 30-year-old sectarian war that went on in Europe. It was also justified by spiritual texts, but by the elimination. Or I wouldn't say elimination. Elimination is the wrong word, but rather the separation of the spiritual texts from the judicial law or judicial instruments that are being implemented and used. You could achieve.
You had so many.
I'm sorry if I've spoken away too long.
I have to ask Mr. Mann.
Actually, I'm going to go to another subject, another way, far from what he's saying. He's talking about how we solve the conflict there in the region. I would like to mention one very important part of that. The social security there in Sweden, in Finland, in England. Do you know how much the foreigner, I'm sorry to tell that, the environment, using this social security actually against them? we have to consider, we have to tell the government of Finland, Sweden, England, they have to really consider carefully how they establish or manage the social security. There are so many people who get money from the government and they are sitting at home, sleeping, eating, drinking, doing nothing, no job, nothing, and then they have plenty of time. Maybe they are using this plenty of time of different things. This subject is very critical, and I think it's very important. This is one point. Another point, I don't want to talk a lot. Another point, educational system, whether here or in our countries, we need to really go deep into it in order to see how we educate people, how we make vision to the youth people. And also, as I said, the job and opportunities to work, thus we have also to look at it, besides what he's saying. Thank you very much.
I would like to ask about the weapon, how they get weapons and where they get them from. Some of the analysts say that the council of Syrian new government, they become a weapon seller to ISIS. So how would this really, how real is this?
Thank you for asking. That's quite an important question, but we need to expand this thought a little bit wider. I mean, the militarization in the region is a disastrous phenomenon that has been going on since the 60s, earlier, even before the 60s. I mean, in Iraq in 1967, 65% of the GDP actually was based on industry and oil. But then successfully, as the Iraqi army was growing further and further, weaker, and actually we happened to, unfortunately, in a very long and disastrous war, be fighting our neighbor for 8 years. I mean, in an injustice war, I would say, the GDP just went to 85% of oil incomes. I mean, so the industry just collapsed, and what was built further than that was the military industry in Iraq. So, part of the weapons that the ISIS or IS are using both in Iraq and Syria actually originate from previous weapons that we have already purchased before. Many other parts of weapons, new technologies that we hadn't seen before in the region, was actually provided by other states. I mean, Saudi Arabia was buying many weapons and handing out to al-Nusra or the so-called Free Syrian Army. And yeah, well, that goes by Turkey. Qatar was having the same role as well. The United States was also planning on funding and also buying weapons. And I mean, it's not that far ago when President Obama announced that he was giving 500 million to the moderate Syrian resistance. And one really wonders if there isn't a moderate Syrian resistance, where would this money go, really? One of these solutions as well is actually the demilitarization of the society. We have an enormously spread of weapons in Iraq. Not only in Iraq, I mean in the region generally, but I'm speaking about Iraq also specifically. There is an approximation that each two individuals in Iraq almost share a Kalashnikov. And that's really horrifying in tremendous scales. Thank you.
Oh yeah, just to answer your question more specifically in the context of the Islamic State. Not entirely convinced yet that there are actual states who are arming the Islamic State. It's a different actor from the Islamic Front and Jabhat al-Nusra. The Jabhat al-Nusra has been it's been given guns by Saudi Arabia, by Turkey, by Qatar. But the Islamic State is a creature of its own. It was still in the early months very heavily affiliated with Al-Qaeda, and even Saudi Arabia was very reserved in its relationship or lack thereof with the Islamic State because of the aftermath of Al-Qaeda's campaign in in Saudi Arabia from 2000 to 2006, I think. There was a wave of terrorist attacks, and after that Saudi Arabia has been more unwilling or less willing to provide funds or weapons for jihadis. It rode the jihadi tiger early in the late 80s and during the 90s. But after Al-Qaeda's brief introduction into Saudi Arabia is no longer one of the state sponsors of jihadism or global jihadism. Of course, a good question is, why isn't Saudi Arabia doing more to really cut down on the funding flow of, well, from rich Saudis through Kuwait to jihadi groups? But again, this is very different from state support. And this is important when it comes to guns, because if we take away states as sponsors or as sources of weapons, there's not that much left. One place is war loot. They conquer areas, they get weapons through it. Another is the plethora of small arms that are already in the region, definitely in Lebanon, in Turkey's border areas, in Iraq. You can buy small weapons really, really cheaply. And as the conflict continues, the price of small weapons increases. And then you have local entrepreneurs either making guns or selling guns or facilitating flow of guns from suppliers to buyers. And of course, there's the local gun industry, small smiths in places like Tripoli in Lebanon. But that kind of is small level stuff. But I think personally, the main source of weapons in case of Syria is loot from the Syrian army, and in case of Iraq, it's loot from the Iraqi Armed and Security Forces. And this goes to your point on Mosul, what happened in Mosul. In fact, there were so many structural and motivational issues with the armed forces that they just decided to cut and run. Because they didn't have leaders, they weren't properly fed, they were fed up with the situation, and they decided to hightail it off security. Most of them, or some of them, marched to their deaths, but they left behind a significant amount of weapons, Humvees, helicopters. IS is even captured, I think, a fighter right now. But most of the more sophisticated weapon systems, they just absolutely cannot use, or they're inoperable due to lack of maintenance for the past 10-15 years when Assad's regime or Iraq was unable to maintain those weapon systems.
Just one more point. Actually, I don't want to add, because I don't want to repeat to what they are saying, because they are correct. 2-3 factors. Do you know, there's one point mentioned, do you know that Syrian regime, ISIS against Syrian regime also supplying ISIS weapons? Why? Because when the conflict emerged between the ISIS and the National Council for the Opposition, so the Syrian regime, oh God, that's good for us. If we get the conflict better and better, it's good for us. And I have met one of the Iraqi security person, and I asked him, what's happening? He said, do you know that the Syrian regime helped ISIS to go to Iraq because they want to get the fresh air from ISIS? So just imagine how this working easily. The other factor which I want to finish, that ISIS now become very wealthy because of the oil. And there are so many countries also buying oil from them, secretly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, but you mentioned many countries during your speech, but there are very important players that not been mentioned. Israel helped the ISIS to by bomb raids on Syria and treating the wounded in Israeli hospitals before rearming them to go back to Syria to escalate the carnage. So, who want to have a comment?
You know, we didn't talk about Israel, or nobody talked about Israel. I always ask people, politicians, why America and Europe start to confront ISIS when they are reaching Kurdistan, Erbil. So one of the politicians said that in Erbil, in Kurdistan, there are so many Israeli enterprises in Erbil. So Israel is also involving in this conflict. They are also using ISIS in one way or another. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Final remarks by Professor Ahmed Yusuf,
I would like to thank panelists very much. I have no remarks. It's been a long day, a long session, and I'm surprised that you have stayed so long here. I think it's really time to leave now and have a nice evening thinking about something much nicer than this ISIS in Iraq or Syria. But I'm sure the discussion will go on in the future, and many things will get clearer by time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.